Good morning. 10:27. Give me just a minute, guys. I never can quite get that right. Hang on. I'm going to put you back on the welcome screen. Share a product with you guys today. So I don't the hair. I don't get any kind of. I can actually apparently on YouTube. I can get what is that? Where you get money because you're promoting products. I don't do that. I may in the future, but I don't right now. I know I'm eligible to do it. Let me get this honed in here. Pretend you're talking to me and not my stack of dishes in the dish thing that need to be put away. But anyway, most of you guys know I have an ulcer. I have 2 ulcers. And when I went to the doctor the other day, they told me I needed to give up coffee. And I said, well, I've been drinking decaf. Well, apparently it doesn't matter because there's so much caffeine in coffee. And caffeine is really bad if you've got stomach ulcers. Good morning, Mary Louise. Beautiful name. Good morning, Coffin. I won't say anything about your name. But anyway, so I was trying to find some kind of like low acid coffee. So I looked up low acid coffee. It is like $14 to $27 for 11 ounces of low acid coffee. And so I was reading the reviews and people were like, I'm still having trouble, still having trouble. And I thought, shoot, that's a lot of money to spend considering the amount of coffee I drink. And so I somehow stumbled onto chicory. And it's so funny that I did not think of chicory because I lived in Louisiana, and that's where it became really popular. And I want to say I've probably had a chicory coffee blend. So chicory is a root; it's not actually coffee at all. And some people will blend that with coffee just to, I guess, give it a fullness or maybe reduce the why, reduce the bangs. I'm always messing with them. Reduce the acid. But so I thought, well, I'm going to take my chances with chicory. And I'm so glad it worked out well the first time because I'm not one to give things a second chance. And I probably should more often. This adorable shirt I got off Amazon. So cute. Okay, so I'm going to show you this. Where is it? There's my screen share. Okay, so and and so I always make him try things. He's like, I don't want to try it. I'm like, try it. I don't want to try it. Just try it. So he tried it and he actually liked it, which was interesting because he's like, oh, it's so, so much more mild. It's not got that harsh, that kind of acidic taste that you can feel on the backs and sides of your tongue if you're drinking coffee. Mary Louise says there's something called Pero that's a good coffee substitute, also made with chicory. Interesting. You guys are so smart. I hope our Rumble chat's working. If you're on Rumble, let me know. I can't see who these chats. I'm guessing Coffin's probably over on Rumble. Yeah, that's Rumble. I can actually see it. That's YouTube. YouTube. All right. Hooray. I went ahead and I downloaded the book. Let me turn that up a little bit. Downloaded the Kindle app for the book because I have arthritis in my hands and that book got heavy super quick last week. And I am drinking the coffee. It's so good. I have just a little vanilla creamer in it. And I notice usually when I drink coffee, I have to add some additional sweetener like monk fruit or whatever. This I didn't have to. Just a little bit of vanilla coffee creamer, and it's so good. I actually even wrote a review for it, and I don't normally write reviews. So good stuff if you're looking for a way to give your belly a break from caffeine, or if it bothers your heart, or um, you've got IBS and you don't want to spend all morning in the bathroom. The chicory seems to be working really well. I drank it yesterday, waited and waited. Usually within 10 minutes, I can tell it's going to hurt me, but I did totally fine. So that was cool. Viewers' comments will not be visible when streaming to a Facebook profile unless the stream is set to public. It is set to public. All right. Well, hopefully that's okay. All right. So let me get rid of this screen share. if I can. Delete, exit screen share. There we go. And we'll start with our book. I hope you guys are having a good week. My poor husband has been so tired all week. Where did my window maybe? Yeah, there it is. He's been so tired all week. Just we didn't get enough sleep this weekend. And you know how that piles on you as you get older. It's so funny. I can remember when I was a kid staying awake like the entire weekend. And yeah, we would crash and burn on Sunday and sleep all day. But we could do it for a couple of days. And we're struggling as we get older. He's putting the he had to replace the starter in the Jetta, and he was really stressed about that because in order to replace a starter in a Jetta, you have to pretty much take the entire car apart. You have to take the radiator out, all this stuff. So he found where he could loosen a few bolts, and I could pull back on the radiator housing, and then he could slip the alternator in. So he actually got that in a lot easier than he thought he was going to be able to. But while he was under there, he figured out the CV boot on the axle was messed up. So he's like, I'm just going to replace the whole axle because it's easier. So he got the axle yesterday. Tonight he's going to come home and do the axle because last night I had him fixing my internet connection and getting me wired back up. So he's going to be under a car tonight. Luckily, it's going to be dry and the weather's nice here. It's supposed to be close to 80 today. Here in Kentucky, it's nice. But anyway, poor guy. He's tired. Okay, hold on. Let me get to this. Cancel. There we go. Now, let's share our screen here, and we'll get us to the Kindle app. And that one, yes. We don't need to show. What the heck happened there? Okay, there we go. Let me just make that box a little bit bigger so you guys can read it. But anyway, I hope you're doing well. Drop a like while you're here, and a follow, and a share. Sharing is caring. And for the people in your life, maybe that are people of faith, but that are having trouble to wake up to waking up to what's going on, share these Jonathan Cahn reads with them, because I think like last week it was just so shocking the dates as he worked out the dates. You couldn't help but be compelled by it. And so share that with your friends that are struggling to wake up, and maybe once they see it in a book, they'll be more willing to listen to the things that you're telling them that aren't conspiracy theories, that are actually true. All right, there we go. So we're on chapter 21, Breaking the Gods. Let me make sure we're good on comments. We are. All right, let me get over here where I can see. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. There we go. Okay. Breaking the Gods. Baal's connection to child sacrifice was as infamous as that of the god Moloch. When judgment finally fell on Israel's northern kingdom, the nation's obituary appeared in 2 Kings verse 17. Prominent among the causes of its destruction was that the people served Baal, and they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire. Destroying Baal from Israel. It was the cult of Baal and the act of child sacrifice that caused the nation's destruction. That cult and that act centered and was embodied in the temple of Baal in the nation's capital city. So when Jehu came against that temple, he was coming against an institution, a religion, a priesthood, a system, and a practice. He was waging war against the systematic murder of the nation's children, and thus, as the account reads, not only did he destroy a temple, but he drove out a god and his cult. He destroyed Baal from Israel. In this, Jehu was unique. He was the only ruler in the history of Israel's northern kingdom who actively sought to drive Baal out of the land and to end the practice of child sacrifice. Even in the less apostate kingdom of Judah, the number of kings who sought to do likewise was minuscule. As he walked in the template of the ancient king, Donald Trump would likewise wage war against the systematic killing of children. And as Jehu was unique among the kings of the northern kingdom in his war against Baal, Trump was unique among American presidents in the post-Roe v. Wade era in the effectiveness of his war against the killing of children. Jehu had destroyed Baal from Israel. Trump would seek to do similarly with regard to abortion in America. His administration would be overwhelmingly consistent in its attempts to protect the unborn. Trump would become the first sitting American president to address the annual March for Life in Washington, D.C. His administration would act to protect the freedom of those whose conscience prohibited them from funding or assisting in the killing of the unborn. And as Jehu cut off all state support for the cult of Baal and child sacrifice, Trump cut off all state funding for abortions around the world and sought the defunding of abortion organizations from the federal government or federal budget, bringing down the temple. In his campaign of 2016, Trump promised that as president, he would appoint judges who would stand for life, and that would lead to the overturning of abortion as the nation had known it. And so the paradigm of Jehu and the Temple of Baal was about much more than a building. In the case of Trump, it was about bringing down an institution, a ruling, and a practice. And the unique role that he would play in bringing it down was no accident, but a prerequisite of the ancient paradigm. Baal comes to New York. 1 month before his final debate with Hillary, and less than 2 months before the election, something strange happened. An object appeared on the streets of New York City, a foreign object. It was a representation of a Middle Eastern object from Palmyra, Syria, the city of the Temple of Baal that had been destroyed just after Trump began his rise to power. It was an arch. Some called it the Arch of Baal. It was the arch that, in ancient times, led the worshippers of Baal into his temple. It was erected on the grounds of City Hall. It was unveiled at the order of city officials to the playing of music meant to evoke the worship of Baal and to the cheers of those gathered to witness it. Baal's temple had fallen when the American Jehu had begun his rise. But now an object linked to that temple was erected in the land of the modern-day Jehu. In fact, it was standing in the land of both presidential contenders, New York. And it was standing in New York City, where the blood of more children had been spilled than anywhere else in the nation. There was even a written sign placed by the arch identifying it with the Temple of Baal. So now, just as the American Jehu was on the verge of coming to power, a reign that would threaten the bloody practice linked to the worship of Baal, an object bearing the name of the god and connected to his temple appeared in the land. First act. In order for Trump to make good on his promise to appoint Supreme Court justices who would stand for life, several factors had to fall into place, each of which was beyond his control. First, he had to win the election. Against all odds and the conclusions of virtually every poll, he did. Second, the doors would have to open to the Supreme Court, meaning Supreme Court justices would have to resign or die during the window of his presidency. They did. Trump made his first Supreme Court nomination less than 2 weeks after becoming president. To replace the deceased Justice Antonin Scalia, he nominated Neil Gorsuch. Gorsuch was confirmed on April 7, 2017. Since Gorsuch was such a conservative justice replacing another conservative justice, the appointment did not alter the balance of the court, but preserved it. Second act. The following year in June, another Supreme Court vacancy opened up as Justice Anthony Kennedy announced he would be resigning. Though Kennedy was considered a moderate when it came to issues such as gay marriage and abortion, he voted with the court's liberal wing. Trump chose Brett Kavanaugh to replace him. Unlike Kennedy, Kavanaugh was a conservative and decidedly pro-life. It was to be confirmed. It would alter the court, giving it a pro-life majority. Thus, the confirmation hearings became a battleground, a focal point of the culture wars. A flurry of accusations, defenses, and counter-accusations swirled around the nomination. Behind the controversy was the issue of life and abortion. And then something strange happened. Bail comes to Washington. The media was blind to it, and most people never realized it happened. But in the days of the Kavanaugh hearings and the fury that surrounded them, an object appeared in Washington, D.C. It appeared on the national lawn facing the Capitol building, the place in which the hearings were to take place. It was a foreign object from Palmyra. The Arch of Baal was now standing in the nation's capital and representing the Temple of Baal. So while the battle over abortion and life raged on Capitol Hill, the object representing the Temple of Baal, the ancient god of child sacrifice, appeared in front of it. The elements of the ancient paradigm again manifested. Jehu as embodied by Trump, Jehu's war against the cult of Baal and the systematic killing of children as embodied by his Supreme Court nomination, and the temple of Baal and child sacrifice as embodied by abortion and that arch. The arch was a gateway through which worshipers entered into Baal's temple. So it was first erected in New York City, the gateway through which child sacrifice had spread to America. So too it was erected in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, and the gateway through which child sacrifice spread to the nation through Roe v. Wade. Third act. After a storm of controversy, contention, and accusations, Kavanaugh was confirmed by the United States Senate on October 6, 2018, by a margin of 2 votes, and only because the Senate happened to be in control of the Republicans. The court was now solidly pro-life, and the implications were enormous. Still, one more Supreme Court justice and one more vote would be needed for the paradigm to be fulfilled. This would also come to pass apart from anyone's intent or control. It would happen at the very end of the Trump presidency, so close to the end that it was doubtful that it would happen at all. It would come to a head only 8 days before the presidential election that would mark the end of Trump's presidency, but it would go through. And it would give the court an even stronger and more decisive pro-life majority. It was this third Supreme Court justice that would provide the critical vote in a ruling that would alter the nation's course. So I want to share this too, guys. So a lot of people who are pro-choice are really upset with the Republicans over this pro-choice agenda. And I always tell them, don't be mad at us. You always knew where we stood on it. Be mad at the Democrats, because the Democrats, from Bill Clinton to Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, all of them promised that they would codify Roe v. Wade into law. And here's the really interesting thing while we're reading this. So Joe Biden, when he was running, said he would codify it into law, which would mean that you couldn't send it back to the states, that Roe v. Wade would be the law of the land. They've been promising to do this for decades now, and they've not gotten it done. Even when Obama had a majority of Democrats, they didn't do it, which tells you that they don't care about abortion. They just want it as a cudgel to beat the Republicans with during an election. Because if it were actually important to them, they could have codified it multiple times over, but they didn't. The really interesting thing about them not codifying it is this time when it came up in the courts, the initial ruling got leaked. It got leaked over a month ahead of time. So that gave the Democrats a heads up of at least a month. I think it might have been 60 days ahead of time it was leaked. But it gave them a heads up of what was coming, and they made no move to codify it. None. It was crazy. They absolutely could have gotten it done, and they didn't do it. You had this announcement basically of, hey, they're going to send Roe v. Wade back to the states. This is going to happen in the Supreme Court. And they could have taken action right then to codify it, but for some reason didn't do it. And that has blown my mind from the beginning, because I'm like, that's so crazy. They knew what was coming and they didn't codify it. Why? Why wouldn't they do that if this was so important to them? Well, if they codify it, then they don't have it to beat the Republicans over the head with every election season. So they let it pass, just to make the Republicans the bad guys, which we'll gladly take in the eyes. And I don't even consider myself a Republican. I consider myself a conservative. But isn't that interesting that they didn't take care of that when they absolutely could have? I just thought that was crazy. And I thought it was interesting that no one was talking about it. Like, how could you not blame this on the Democrats? They absolutely could have fixed it. And then they get an advance warning that this is definitely coming, which we'd never had before. We'd never been able to get it through. And now it goes through and they do nothing to stop it. It's like knowing a building for them. It's like knowing a building is going to catch fire and you know, 2 months ahead, and you don't do anything to stop it. All right. Breaking the pillar. Trump's appointing of the 3 Supreme Court justices would prove to be among the most consequential acts of his presidency. The first appointment was set in motion less than 2 weeks after the start of his presidency, and the last would be completed near the end. When Jehu brought down the Temple of Baal, he was doing more than destroying a building. He was bringing down an institution. Abortion was America's form of Baal worship. It rested on one critical Supreme Court ruling, that of Roe v. Wade. I don't know what that is. Roe v. Wade was a modern-day version of the Temple of Baal. It was the vessel, the structure that allowed for the sacrifice of children. So the modern-day Jehu would seek to bring down the modern-day Temple of Baal. The nullifiers. Had Trump not risen to power just when he did, all of this would have never happened. He had to be lifted to the presidency, and exactly when he was. Trump's 4 years in power were just enough to set in motion the 3 Supreme Court justices and secure the 3 votes needed to bring down the modern-day Temple of Baal. He would put forth his last and most critical nomination at the end of his presidency in 2020. And so, Jehu's bringing down of Baal's temple, the breaking of abortion, would be set in motion in the 50th year of abortion's entrance into the land, the year of Jubilee. The Jubilee nullifies, undoes what was done. Jehu nullified the Temple of Baal. Now the 2 nullifiers would come together, the modern-day Jehu and the ancient Jubilee. No one could have planned it, and no one could have orchestrated it, but it would all converge at the exact and appointed time. And it could not have converged if Biden had acted to codify Roe v. Wade. So even the Democrats played a role in this. Fascinating. And yet with all that, it still would not have happened had there not been another stream of events and mysteries and another convergence in the pieces of the puzzle. This one would as well be connected to the Jubilee, but of a different nature. It would come from the Jubilee's other realm, and although its movement went almost unnoticed when it fulfilled its mission, it would change the course of American history. Part 5, The Jubilee and Redemption. Chapter 22, A Dark Conception. When abortion began its entrance into American society and law, it did not come at once, but step by step, law by law, and state by state. But there would be another entrance, different from the others. It would not be initiated by a state legislature or a government official. It would begin when a troubled young woman visited the office of a Texas attorney, Henry McCloskey. What was conceived in that office would take years to come to fruition, but when it came, its impact on American culture would be seismic. It would change the lives of millions, born and unborn. The making of Jane Roe. Norma Leah McCorvey was 21 years old when she discovered she was pregnant. It was her third child. She had a drinking problem and partook of illegal drugs. She wanted to abort the baby. McCluskey referred her to two attorneys who were looking for a white pregnant woman to use as the plaintiff in a lawsuit that they wanted to mount over abortion. Upon meeting with them, McCorvey was told that her unborn child was just a piece of tissue. She agreed to become their plaintiff, believing it would allow her to continue to drink and partake of drugs without having to worry about her unborn child. The Jubilee of Roe v. Wade. The lawsuit was filed against Dallas County District Attorney Henry Wade, representing the state of Texas. McCorvey was given a new name for the purpose of the suit, Jane Roe. So the suit would become known as Roe v. Wade. Though the case would become famous because of the 1973 Supreme Court ruling bearing the same name, it did not begin in 1973. It began in the same critical year in which abortion began its entrance into America. Roe v. Wade was filed in 1970. Thus, the year 2020 was not only the jubilee of the year in which abortion on demand was set in motion in America, it was also the jubilee of the year that Roe v. Wade was set in motion. In other words, 50 years after Roe v. Wade began, in the jubilee of its conception, the plague came to America. Month of conception, January 1970, January 2020. Roe v. Wade began with that meeting in McCluskey's office. When did it take place? It happened in January 1970. 50 years forward from that meeting takes us to January 2020, the Jubilee of Roe v. Wade. January 2020 was the month that the plague began in America. It was the Jubilee of the month that Roe v. Wade also began in America. The most accurate reports put that initial meeting between McCorvey and McCluskey in late January of 1970. That would put its jubilee in late January of 2020, and so the plague entered America in late January of 2020. Month of fruition, March 1970, March 2020. The meeting of McCorvey and McCluskey was the critical moment in the conception of the lawsuit that would alter American history. 2 months later, it would come to fruition when the case known as Roe v. Wade was filed against the state of Texas. It was filed in March 1970. 50 years from that filing takes us to March 2020. So too the plague came to fruition in America, falling at full force and impact in March 2020, when America went into a state of emergency, lockdown, and paralysis. It all happened in the jubilee of the conception and fruition of the lawsuit that would become famous as Roe v. Wade. We have again seen the principle of restitution, life for life. But what about the Jubilee's other work, that of restoration and redemption? That too would manifest. It would come as had the plague, with precision and at the appointed times. Chapter 23, a case of nullification. Just checking on you guys down here. Hold on one second. We have seen that the Jubilee is a two-sided phenomenon. To the one who has taken or occupied the ancestral land of another, the Jubilee takes away. But to the one who has lost it, the Jubilee restores. Each of the two sides involves a return and an undoing of what was done. But one manifests in the form of restitution, justice, or judgment, and the other in the form of restoration and redemption. The other side. We have seen the first side in the form of a plague and in the taking away of life from the generation that had taken away life. But what about the other, the side of restoration and redemption? What about an undoing that brings not death but life? The Jubilee of 2020 saw death moving across the land. Could there have been another moving not of death but life? Dobbs versus Jackson. Roe v. Wade had begun as a suit filed against the state of Texas. If the Jubilee is a return and a reversal of that which was done, we would expect to see a return to a suit filed against a state, and that is exactly what took place. In March 2018, the Mississippi legislature passed a law that prohibited abortion after the 15th week of pregnancy. A Mississippi abortion clinic immediately filed a lawsuit against the law. The suit, which would be known as Dobbs v. Jackson, would end up in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Mississippi. The court ruled against the state and for the abortion clinic. The filings. Roe v. Wade had also ended up in a district court. Likewise, the court ruled against the state and for abortion. The state of Texas would appeal the decision, sending Roe v. Wade to the Supreme Court. When the district court ruled against Mississippi and for the abortion clinic, the state likewise filed an appeal. And just as with Roe v. Wade, it would cause the case to go to the Supreme Court. And as with Roe v. Wade, the ruling would be pivotal and historic. Days of appeal, June 1970, June 2020. Everything was now returning to where it had been 50 years earlier. Roe v. Wade was sent on appeal to the Supreme Court in 1970. The case that would bring about its reversal, Dobbs v. Jackson, was sent to the Supreme Court on appeal in 2020, 50 years later. The event that caused Roe v. Wade to be appealed was the ruling of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. With the release of its verdict, both sides began working on the appeal to be sent to the Supreme Court. That verdict, in the beginning of the Supreme Court appeal, took place in June of 1970. The sending of Dobbs v. Jackson on appeal to the Supreme Court took place in June of 2020, 50 years later, one jubilee to the month that the appeal of Roe v. Wade began. Could an ancient queen, an ancient villain, an ancient decree of evil, and another decree of good lie behind two of the most pivotal Supreme Court cases in history? The answer lies in the mystery of Sivan 23. Chapter 24, The Mystery of Sivan 23. The book of Esther recounts how the Jews of Persia were saved from annihilation. It began with the rise of the brutal Persian official Haman, the ordinance of evil. Haman devised a plan to exterminate the Jews of the Persian Empire on the 13th day of the month of Adar. Upon securing the king's approval, the plan was sealed. But before the set day, Esther, the Jewish queen of Persia, along with Mordecai, her cousin, exposed Haman's plan before the king and brought about his downfall. But the evil decree, his plan of annihilation, was still in effect to be carried out on the appointed day. Esther appealed to the king, saying, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the things seem right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in the king's provinces." The ordinance of nullification. The king's answer was to allow for a second decree to be written. "You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews as you please in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring." So a new decree was penned. Its purpose was to nullify the power of the first decree. It authorized the Jews of Persia to assemble on the appointed day and protect themselves with whatever force was needed. It was a decree of life in answer to a decree of death. It was committed to writing by the king's scribes and then sent forth to every province of the empire. The account specifies the day on which the decree was committed to writing to be sent forth. So the king's scribes were called at the time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan. On the 23rd day it was written, according to all that Mordecai commanded. Sivan 23. So it was sealed to be sent throughout the empire on the 23rd day of the Hebrew month of Sivan, Sivan 23. Sivan 23 was thus commemorated in the Jewish calendar as the day to pray for the annulling of evil decrees. One Jewish writer notes, the holy books teach us that this day is a very powerful day for prayers to nullify decrees and anything bad, evil, and horrible against us. A prayer is given in Hebrew to be recited by the Jewish people on the Sivan 23 for the nullification of all evil decrees. O Lord, my rock and my redeemer, from you I am asking for mercy. Bestow your mercy on all of us to transform all evil to good. Annul all harsh decrees concerning us. Tear up the evil of our sentence against the evil decree. The Supreme Court ruling in Roe v. Wade was, in its effect, a decree of death and destruction. As in Haman's decree against the Jews of Persia, it opened the door to destroy, kill, and annihilate the innocent of an entire nation. So the effect of Roe v. Wade was to destroy millions of innocent lives. The number of Jews living in Persia multiplied many, many times over. It was a most evil decree. The decree of Haman would be nullified by the decree of Mordecai. It would be undone by the same means and in kind by a decree sent forth to undo a previous decree, a royal ordinance to nullify a royal ordinance. In the case of Roe v. Wade, the same pattern was replayed. The evil decree in this case was a Supreme Court ruling, so it had to be nullified and undone by the same means and in kind by a Supreme Court ruling, that of Dobbs v. Jackson. When did the case that would nullify Roe v. Wade go forth? When was it sent to the Supreme Court? It went forth on June 15, 2020, but that was the date on the Western Gregorian calendar. On the biblical calendar, it was sent to the Supreme Court on a different date, the 23rd day of Sivan, Sivan 23. The day of revoking. Hi, Steve. In other words, the case that would revoke the evil decree of Roe v. Wade was sent to the Supreme Court on the ancient day when the decree of life was sent forth to nullify the decree of death. The document that would nullify Roe v. Wade went forth on the same day that the document nullifying Haman's decree of death went forth. It was sent to the Supreme Court on the same day that prayers were lifted up across the Jewish world to nullify, revoke, and tear up the decrees of evil. Of course, those who prayed those prayers had no idea the document was being sent, and those who sent the document had no idea that those prayers were being uttered. The decree of Haman and Mordecai. The decree of Mordecai was joined to the decree of Haman, not only in its purpose and impact, but in the pattern of its going forth. Below is the record of how each of the two decrees were issued. First, the decree of death as issued by Haman, and second, the decree of life as issued by Mordecai. Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the 1st month. So the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and written according to all that Haman commanded, and written according to all that Haman had commanded, that Mordecai had commanded. To the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, and to every people in their language. To the satraps, the governors, to every province, to every people in their own language. In the name of King Ahasuerus, it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. Steve, what are you doing? There's nothing under there. It's just a cord. Stop. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring. The countries went out, hastened by the king's command, by couriers on horseback, bred from swift steeds. The decree of Roe and Dobbs. So Mordecai's decree would follow the same pattern, steps, and path of the decree it was meant to nullify. In other words, the redemption would go forth just as had the evil. The ordinance of life would take on the form as the ordinance of death. So too the case that was sent to the Supreme Court on Sivan 23 of 2020 would follow the same pattern, steps and path of Roe v. Wade, the case it was to nullify. In its initial hearing, in its judgment by a federal court, in its appeal to the Supreme Court, and in its timing, Dobbs v. Jackson would parallel the steps, the path, and the timing of Roe v. Wade. And by doing so, it was also paralleling the Sivan 23 decree of Mordecai, which was in turn paralleling the decree of Haman. It was a mystery within a mystery within a mystery. Dobbs v. Jackson was sent to the Supreme Court on the Sivan 23, the day of the decree that nullifies the decree of death and destruction. It was sent in the year 2020, abortion's Jubilean year, and it was sent to the Supreme Court in the year that President who walked in the footsteps of Jehu would complete his third nomination to the court to nullify the evil decree. So it was sent. What happened when it arrived? Chapter 25, Reception. Both cases arrived in the Supreme Court, but their arrival did not, of course, guarantee a hearing. Of the 7,000 or so cases sent to the court each year, only about 2% are accepted and heard. Year of reception, 1971, 2021. In 1970, there was no guarantee that the court would hear Roe v. Wade, or that 50 years later it would hear Dobbs v. Jackson. But in 1971, the Supreme Court announced it would take up and hear the case of Roe v. Wade. 50 years later brings us to the year 2021. In 2021, the court announced it would take up and hear the case of Dobbs v. Jackson. Thus, in the Jubilee year of the courts taking up Roe v. Wade, the court took up Dobbs v. Jackson. Month of reception, May 1971, May 2021. The court announced it would take up Roe v. Wade in the month of May. The court announced it would take up Dobbs v. Jackson 50 years later in the month of May. The same court, the same act, the same matter, and 50 years later, one jubilee to the same month. Of life and death. On the day of Roe's hearing, the attorney for the plaintiff argued that to abort one's pregnancy was a personal right. When questioned if that meant a child could be aborted up to the moment of birth, the attorney answered that it did. The state of Texas argued that once a child is conceived, one does not have the right to end its life. On the day of Dobbs' hearing, the argument centered on using the issue of viability to determine whether a child could be aborted. In other words, the child could be aborted if he or she could not, at that point, survive outside the womb. The abortion clinic argued for that measure of viability to be used in determining whether an abortion could be performed. Mississippi argued that the measure was wrong. Mississippi was not seeking the overturning of Roe v. Wade, but for the right of states to uphold restrictions on abortion beyond that of viability. But the outcome of Dobbs v. Jackson would turn out to be far more consequential and significant than what the state had imagined. So Dobbs v. Jackson would serve as an instrument, a Jubilean instrument through which a reception would come. What are you doing? Steve, I Cats. Year of the hearing, 1971-2021. Roe v. Wade was heard before the Supreme Court in 1971. 50 years later takes us to its Jubilean year 2021. The hearing of Dobbs v. Jackson that would bring the reversal of Roe v. Wade took place in 2021, the Jubilean year of Roe's first hearing. If you hear this tearing in the background, Steve has a napkin that he's tearing apart. Month of the hearing, December 1971, December 2021. When in 1971 did Roe v. Wade receive its first Supreme Court hearing? It happened in December. One Jubilee forward brings us to December 2021. When did Dobbs v. Jackson receive its hearing? It happened in December 2021. The Jubilean case was heard in the 50th year of the case it was to annul, in its Jubilean month and within 12 days of its 50-year culmination point, the 13th day of the 12th month. We must take note of one more convergence. We have seen how the case of Dobbs v. Jackson was sent forth to the Supreme Court on Sivan 23, the same day that Mordecai's decree was sent forth to the Persian Empire to nullify the decree of Haman. The purpose of each was to undo a decree of death. Mordecai's decree went forth to nullify Haman's decree, and Haman's decree was linked to the 13th day of the 12th month. Dobbs v. Jackson went forth to nullify Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade would receive its hearing before the Supreme Court on December 13th, the 13th day of the 12th month. Thus, both the ancient and modern issuance that went forth on Sivan 23 did so to nullify a decree of death linked to the 13th day of the 12th month. Could an error, a glitch, a breaching of protocol, a breaking of order have happened according to an appointed order? Could a wrong have taken place at the right time? The Leak, Chapter 26. The next major event in the case of Dobbs v. Jackson did not happen according to any procedure, plan, or protocol. The leaked draft. It went against all protocols concerning Supreme Court deliberations. It was the court's practice to tightly guard the confidentiality of all internal communications and opinions concerning any case under consideration. But what happened in the case of Dobbs v. Jackson broke those conventions. In the spring of 2022, the news organization Politico published a document that had been obtained through a Supreme Court leak. Apparently, one of the court's employees decided to release an internal communication to the press. It was a draft written by Justice Samuel Alito in the case of Dobbs v. Jackson. The draft did not necessarily represent a final decision, but it stunned much of the nation and the world, as it indicated that Roe v. Wade could or would be overturned. Shockwaves and violence. The leaked document sent shockwaves through the media and culture. Within hours of its release, protests and demonstrations broke out in Washington and across the nation. Pro-abortion protesters demonstrated outside the Supreme Court building, along with pro-life protesters. An unprecedented weight of pressure fell on the court. Pro-abortion spokespeople threatened a summer of rage if Roe was overturned. The Department of Homeland Security began preparing for violent attacks against government officials, ministers, and organizations involved with abortion. Soon after the leak, a wave of attacks was launched against crisis pregnancy centers and pro-life churches. Crowds gathered outside the homes of the Supreme Court justices presumed to be in favor of Roe's overturning. A man was arrested near the home of Justice Kavanaugh for attempted murder. In response to the protests, Congress passed a law to increase protections for the justices and their families. The other leak. Many described the leak as unprecedented, but there was a dramatic precedent. and it concerned a case just as monumental as that of Dobbs v. Jackson. The case was Roe v. Wade. The leak in the Dobbs case came from a document penned by Justice Alito and circulated among his colleagues. The leak in Roe came from a document penned by Justice Douglas and circulated among his colleagues. The leak in Dobbs appeared in an article by Politico. The leak in Roe appeared in an article by the Washington Post. The Politico article focused on the court's internal deliberations. The Washington Post article focused on the court's internal deliberations. The one occurrence was again the parallel of the other. We must now turn to the question of timing. Year of the leak, 1972, 2022. When did each of the two leaks occur? The leak in Roe v. Wade took place in 1972. Adding the 50 years of the Jubilee takes us to the year 2022. The leaks in Dobbs v. Jackson took place in 2022. Thus, even the leak in each case followed the timing and dynamic of the Jubilee. Could the parameters given in the book of Leviticus have determined a modern event that altered American history? Chapter 27, The Jubilee and Redemption. The Supreme Court ruling in Roe v. Wade was handed down on January 22, 1973. With that one decision, abortion on demand became the law of the land. By the time of its Jubilee, over 60 million children had been killed. The Leviticus parameters. So when exactly was the Jubilee of Roe v. Wade? The answer is found in the Jubilean ordinance of Leviticus 25. And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, and the time of the seven Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years, and you shall consecrate the 50th year. 7 times 7 of years from January 22nd, 1973, takes us to January 22nd, 2022. The Jubilean year of Roe v. Wade thus begins on January 22nd, 2022, and concludes 1 year later. All but 22 of its days take place in 2022. The Roe v. Wade Jubilee. We have seen the continual unfolding of convergences between the case that legalized abortion and the case that would undo it. Now we come to the final event upon which all the rest hangs. The Jubilean year of Roe v. Wade began on January 22, 2022, and ended on January 22, 2023. For the mystery to be complete, the final event of the Jubilee, the return and the undoing, would have to take place within the parameters of those days. So when was Roe v. Wade overturned? The Supreme Court would hand down its ruling in the case of Dobbs v. Jackson in June of 2022. That places it in between the two parameters of January 22, 2022 and January 22, 2023. Thus, the overturning and nullifying of Roe v. Wade took place in the Jubilean year of Roe v. Wade. It had all happened in accordance with the ancient mystery and within its parameters of time, as ordained in the book of Leviticus. The year of Jubilee is appointed to bring undoing and reversal. So in the Jubilean year of Roe v. Wade, the ordinance of death had been reversed, and the reversal of death meant life. After over 60 million deaths, the lives of the innocent would now be saved, and the nation would be given a new chance to save them. The Jubilee had thus brought a form of redemption. The single vote. And it all happened through a single vote. While the Mississippi ban on abortion was upheld by a slightly more decisive vote, the reversal of Roe v. Wade came by the vote of a single Supreme Court justice. Every change that would stem from that ruling, even the changing of a nation's course, hung on that one solitary vote. And yet when Dobbs v. Jackson was sent to the Supreme Court, that single vote did not even exist. It would only come into existence by a series of twists and quirks, events that were once again beyond anyone's control. The vote that overturned Roe v. Wade would fall into place only through another stream of mysteries, through an ancient calendar and a mystery of appointed days. Hold on, let me check on you guys. Two friends chatting says Steve is ripping up Stevie Napkin. They're talking about you, Steve. You're famous again. God love him. A Mystery of Days, Chapter 28. Is it possible that the most critical of years, 2020, the year of the plague and lockdown, of disorder and chaos and so many other dramatic events, was actually determined by a 3,000-year-old calendar, even the holy days of ancient Israel? The appointed times. If so, it would not be the first time that significant historical events were marked by them. The Bible itself gives us the first precedents. The crucifixion of the Messiah, as in the sacrifice of a lamb, took place on the Passover, the day of the sanctified lamb, or sacrificed lamb. So too the coming of the Spirit upon the first believers in Jerusalem, the day known as Pentecost, took place on the appointed Hebrew holy day of Shavuot. Even such post-biblical events of significance in Jewish history as General Allenby's liberation of Jerusalem from Turkish rule in December 1917 fell on the eve of Hanukkah, the ancient Jewish festival that celebrates the liberation of Jerusalem. Holy days and judgment. So could one of the most dramatic, consequential, and ominous years of modern history, 2020, have been marked by the ancient holy days of the Bible? And as the year bore the signs of biblical judgment, could those holy days have also manifested with the trappings of judgment? We now open up the mystery of the holy days, a revelation that will provide the next puzzle piece and key in the larger mystery. We must begin with the first of all celebrations given to Israel, and the one that opens the sacred calendar, Passover. Chapter 29, Day of the Lamb. Before any of the other festivals and appointed times of ancient Israel, there was Passover. Passover was the first of all appointed festivals historically and on the sacred yearly calendar. Passover 2020. The first and second days of Passover are the most central to the feast. They are the 2 days on which the Seder, the commemoration and celebration of the Exodus, is traditionally held. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. In 2020, the first 2 days of Passover fell on April 9th and April 10th. It fell just as the full weight of the plague had fallen on the world. It fell as billions throughout the world saw their lives altered in a way they could never before have imagined. In an instant, everything was changed. The world had drawn to a near standstill as an invisible and strange specter of death moved across the world. Festival of the Plague. One of the unique aspects of Passover is that it focuses on the coming of a plague. So in April of 2020, the ancient holiday that tells of the coming of a plague fell in the midst of the coming of a plague. Passover recounts the story of a plague that passed through the land of Egypt, leaving a trail of death in its wake. So in the days of Passover 2020, people all over the world watched in fear and anxiety as a plague passed through their lands, leaving a trail of death in its wake. The bond between the Passover and the plague is so strong that the holiday's name is derived from that very connection. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be on you to destroy you. No other biblical holiday or major holiday of any kind bears such a connection. In 2020, it all came together. The Passover people. The plague that fell on Passover was unique in that it was not indiscriminate in its striking. So too the plague that had brought the world to a standstill during the days of Passover was not indiscriminate. It had focused its weight of its fury on America. Outside of Israel, The land in which Passover was most widely celebrated in 2020 was America. Except for Israel, America had more Jewish people than any other nation on earth, and within America, the Jewish population was especially centered in one small area, New York, and specifically its metropolitan area. And that was the same area on which the plague had focused its fury. And it was during Passover, the feast of the plague, that the plague's impact on New York would reach its peak. So as Jewish people throughout the New York metropolitan area commemorated the festival of the plague, an actual plague was raging around them. Feast of Lockdowns. But Passover not only involved a plague, but a measure of prevention taken in light of it. On the first Passover, the people of Israel were told to go inside their homes and stay there until the plague passed through the land. In other words, Passover also involved a lockdown imposed upon the nation because of a plague. Passover was the first recorded national lockdown in world history. In 2020, Passover came to a world in which the people had been ordered to go into their homes and stay there until it was safe to come out. When the Passover came to America, the lockdowns were at their peak. During the Feast of the Plague, approximately 95% of Americans were in lockdown, most of these confined to their homes. After 3,000 years. So as the Jewish people observed the ancient feast and recited the ancient account of how the people of the land were directed by their leaders to stay inside their home until the plague had passed them by, they did so at the same time that their leaders had told them to stay inside their homes until a plague had passed them by. And in the land of Israel, that same Passover, in view of the plague that was passing through the land, the government had ordered the people to stay inside their homes from Passover Eve to Passover morning. It was the first time such a thing had happened in over 3,000 years, since the day of the first Passover, when Moses gave his nation the same command. Passover world. And though America had become the center of the plague, it had, of course, come upon the entire world. During the days of Passover, the world's lockdown was at its peak, with an unprecedented half of the entire human population sheltered behind the walls of their homes. The scriptures speak of the gospel, the message of Messiah, in terms of Passover. The New Testament faith began on Passover with the crucifixion. The one revealed as Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus, is spoken of as the Passover lamb, the only hope and answer to judgment. It was always a Passover faith. In the latter part of the 20th century, much of the Christian West, including America and Europe, began noticeably departing from the Christian faith. By the early part of the 21st century, there was more and more talk of the end of a Christian America and the decoupling of Western civilization from Christianity. Thus, it's worthy of a note that as America and other nations had fallen away from their Passover faith and from the Passover lamb, in 2020 the Passover came back and was manifested itself in force. The same civilization that had departed from Passover was brought back into it, a plague, a judgment, and the command to stay inside one's home until the plague had passed. The only thing missing was the lamb. A civilization that had turned away from the lamb now found itself in need of him. Passover is the first of the appointed times and holy days. It leads to another, and it would be this other ancient holy day that would hold the key to the next dramatic event of that most dramatic year. And this one, too, would carry the dynamics of judgment. Just checking on you guys over here. Chapter 30, Days of Fire and Breath. Passover, the first great festival of Israel, pushers in the second. In the midst of the first festival, the countdown begins for the second. The Festival of Sevens, Shavuot. The countdown is similar to that Alexa, how do you say SHAVUOT?
Okay, but which language do you want me to translate to?
Hebrew.
SHAVUOT in Hebrew is Samech Aleph Tet.
Hope you could hear she gave a translation instead of a pronunciation. Alexa, pronounce SHAVUOT.
The word Shavuot is pronounced Shavuot.
Shavuot.
However, it is important to note that pronunciation can vary depending on factors such as regional dialects and individual pronunciation
Alexa, stop.
styles.
What she said before, but there was no way I could repeat that. Shavuot. The countdown is similar to that of the Jubilee, except that instead of years, it consists of days. 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. Count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall offer a new grain offering to the Lord. The second of the great festivals and appointed gatherings of Israel receives its name from this countdown, the Festival of Weeks, or Sevens, or in Hebrew, Shavuot. Shavuot was linked to the great summer harvest, a period of several months in which the Israelites went out into the land and reaped their fields and vineyards. The summer harvest would approach its end only with the coming of the autumn holy days. By calculating the days of the countdown from the first Passover, the rabbis concluded that Moses went up Mount Sinai to receive the law on the day of Shavuot. So the holiday became, as well, a commemoration of the gift of the land of Sinai. Pentecost. When the Bible was translated from Hebrew into Greek, the festival of early summer was given a new name, the Feast of the 50th Day, or in Greek, Pentecost. It is by this name that most people know it. The book of Acts records that the Spirit of God fell upon the first believers on the day of Pentecost. Thus, the Hebrew feast of early summer took on a new meaning. It became known as the day when the Spirit of God came upon the disciples to empower them to go forth to the nations, to proclaim the gospel to the ends of the earth. Festival of the Law. If the first appointed feast manifested in the form of judgment, could the second do so as well? Passover leads into Shavuot, so the first shaking of America led into a second. In the spring of 2020, as the nation was still reeling from the coming of a plague, a second shaking was unleashed. Many believe that the plague's disruptive impact on America's social order paved the way for what was to come. Whereas Shavuot, or Pentecost, marked the giving of the law, now it would mark the removal of law. It all began when those entrusted with upholding and enforcing the law were judged as having broken it. As a result of his brutal treatment at the hands of law enforcement officers, an African-American George Floyd died on the streets of Minneapolis. His death set off a wave of anger and protests, lawlessness, violence, and destruction. It began in Minneapolis, but then spread to other American cities. There were multitudes of calls to defund or eliminate law enforcement officers altogether, and in some places their presence was in effect eliminated as sections of cities became as war zones. Lawless. The protests, violence, demonstrations, riots, and destruction broke out in over 140 American cities. Before the summer was over, the number of demonstrations or riots would exceed 10,000. The amount of damage caused by the riots skyrocketed into the billions. At least 19 people would lose their lives. Over 14,000 people would be arrested. The number of those who had taken part was estimated at between 15 million and 26 million. More than half of all American states had to call in the National Guard. Even the nation's capital appeared to be under siege. It was believed to be the largest or most widespread movement of protests, disorder, and riots in American history. And all this came upon a nation already badly traumatized by a deadly plague still moving through its borders. And it was more than the riots. The same season that gave birth to the riots gave birth to an explosion of violent crime throughout the nation. So at the time of the second festival, the celebration of the law, there came lawlessness. Festival of Breath. But there was more to the appointed day. Under its Greek name Pentecost, the second festival became most widely associated with the Spirit. It would become known as the Day of the Spirit. The Gospel of John records Yeshua, Jesus, foretelling the event. And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." The Spirit was linked to breath. The connection was intentional. The word for spirit in the Old Testament is the Hebrew word ruach. Ruach also means breath. The word for spirit in the New Testament is the Greek pneuma. Pneuma, likewise, also means breath. The day of the Spirit is the day of the breath. The gift of the Spirit is the gift of the breath, and the breath of God brings life. The removal of breath. So if the season of Shavuot, Pentecost, was connected to the giving of breath, what would happen if it came in the form of judgment? It would mean the taking away of breath. What ignited the explosion of those days was the death of George Floyd in the streets of Minneapolis. The last words he uttered before he died were, "I can't breathe." So in the season of Ruach, the pneuma, and the breath was removed. And all that which then came upon the nation, the explosion of violence, protests, chaos, and destruction, began with the taking away of breath. The season that once gave birth to a movement of life and to a people filled with the breath of God, now gave birth to a movement of death and to multitudes chanting the words, "I can't breathe," in cities across the nation. And it was all happening in a land already under the shadow of a plague that robbed people of their breath. As the Passover of that year spoke to civilization that had turned away from the Lamb, so the Pentecost that followed spoke to one that had become empty of the Spirit, the breath of God. Festival of Fire. But there was more to the ancient holy day, an element that would become its sign. When the day of Pentecost had fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Then there appeared to them divided tongues as of fire, and one sat upon each of them, and they were all filled with the Holy Spirit. That same element appears in the words of John the Baptist when he spoke of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. The element even appears in the giving of the law on Mount Sinai, as celebrated on Shavuot, Pentecost. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Fire is the primary symbol used to represent the Pentecost recorded in the book of Acts. It is known as the day of holy fire, the fire of God's Spirit, and the fire that literally appeared over the disciples when the Spirit came. A different flame. The fire of Pentecost was a blessing, but to a nation under judgment, Pentecost now came with a different fire, a fire not of blessing but judgment. Fires now blazed in the streets of America, in its stores, its businesses, its homes, and even its police stations. Fires now lit up its cities and night skies. The fire had fallen at the appointed time of fire, but not for good, but destruction. May 28th, 2020. In the year 2020, when did the feast known as Pentecost and Shavuot fall? On both the Jewish and Christian calendars, it fell in the last days of May. When did the shakings that would set cities on fire come upon America? They came upon America in the last days of May. In the days leading up to Pentecost, the fire was kindled. George Floyd was killed, and the first protests began in Minneapolis. But on May 28th, it reached its critical mass. It was that day that major protests erupted not only in Minnesota, but in the major cities of other states. And that night, it all exploded. It was then that rioters overtook the Minneapolis police station of the 3rd Precinct and set it on fire. And it was then that the nation and much of the world took notice and realized something major was beginning. And it was that same evening of fire, Thursday night, May 28th, that an ancient feast began, the Feast of Shavuot Pentecost. It started just before sunset as Jewish people began lighting the candles of the holiday, shadows of the fires that would be lit that same night. Shavuot would be observed in the Jewish world into the weekend, when it would usher in Pentecost Sunday. That Pentecost Sunday, as Christians celebrated the day of holy fire, a very different fire spread across the nation. Summer harvest. Shavuot is also the holiday that consecrated the summer harvest. In the year 2022, it would launch a summer harvest of fury and violence. Among the signs given in the Bible of a nation under judgment are those of lawlessness, violence, division, and destruction, not to mention pestilence and plague. All these were now manifesting across America and at the same time. In the season of Passover, the feast of the plague and lockdown came, a plague and the lockdown. Then, at the time of Shavuot Pentecost, the feast of law, breath, and fire, came the removal of law, the removal of breath, and the sending of a different fire. But the ancient calendar was not finished. It would now move into an entirely different realm. The next ancient holy day was very different from those that preceded it, and its manifestation would focus on one specific day and one particular building. What would it bring? Chapter 31, The Heavenly Court. We now come to the most sacred and awesome time of the ancient biblical calendar, known as the Days of Awe, Yom Teruah. In biblical times, as the end of the summer harvest draws near, the focus returned to the holy city of Jerusalem. There were the days of Teshuvah, a Hebrew word that means both return and repentance. It was the season ordained from ancient times to return to God, to get right, to repent, to forgive, and to be forgiven. The days of national repentance and return were heralded on the first of the high holy days. The day had been ordained by an ancient decree as mysterious as it was brief. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath rest, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. It would be called Yom Teruah, or the day of the trumpet blast. It would become known as the Feast of Trumpets. Later on, it would also be called Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. But it was not the New Year. It was the opening of the 7th month, the final month of the sacred calendar. The sounding of the trumpet or shofar was in this case a spiritual alarm, a reminder that judgment was coming and that each must be prepared to stand before God. It was a wake-up call to get right, to repent, to return. Day of the Judge. The Feast of Trumpets was also known as Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment. The judgment alluded to was not so much that of calamity or disaster, but rather that handed down by a judge or magistrate before whom one has been summoned to stand. The Hebrew prayer known as the Unetanana Tokef had recited on the Feast of Trumpets, describes the judgment. You alone are the one who judges, proves, knows, and bears witness. Who writes and seals? Who counts and calculates? Who remembers all that was forgotten? You will open the book of Chronicles. The great shofar will be sounded, and a still, thin sound will be heard. Angels will hasten, a trembling and terror will seize them, and they will say, Behold, it is the day of judgment. The image given is that of God as the judge of all. According to the prayer, God is not only the judge, but the witness who bears testimony, the attorney who proves the case, and the recorder who writes down all that is of note. He is all in all. Thus, the judgment given on the Feast of Trumpets and the days of awe is that of a verdict issued by a presiding judge after the defendant has been given a hearing. The context is judicial. The imagery is that of a courtroom, and this is precisely the context and imagery through which the Jewish world views the high holy days, that of a judge, a court, and a judgment. So as the summer draws to a close, the Jewish are fixed on a court, the heavenly court. The observance, teachings, and prayers of the high holy days do not, of course, refer to just any court, but to the court that stands high above all other courts. It is known as the heavenly court. Such verses as found in Psalm 82 and describing God presiding in a heavenly court and rendering judgment on the earth are cited as its scriptural foundation. God takes his hand in the divine assembly. Among the divine beings, he renders judgment. The central text of rabbinical Judaism, the Talmud, describes the deliberations of the heavenly court. On the Feast of Trumpets, it says, the books of the heavenly court are opened, and for those who have forgiven those who have sinned against them, the heavenly court in turn forgoes punishment. So the days of awe are focused on the heavenly court and the verdicts to be rendered from its deliberations, the most supreme of all courts. The year was now approaching late September. It was the time of the Feast of Trumpets and the days of awe, when a nation is to turn to the judicial realm, the matter of judgment, and to a court. Would the mystery continue to manifest? As the sacred calendar turned to the realm of the judicial, so at that very moment the eyes of America turned to the realm of the judicial. The sacred calendar turns to the most high of courts. There is only one institution that could constitute the most high, of course, with regard to America, the Supreme Court. Indeed, the court spoken of on the Feast of Trumpets liturgy is known as the supreme of all courts. And so as the sacred calendar turned to the Most High Court, at that same moment, the eyes of America turned to the nation's Most High Court. And as the Feast of Trumpets calls all to look to him who judges, proves, knows, and bears witness, the Most High Judge, the eyes of America were turned to a judge, the highest of judges in the nation's judiciary, one of the 9 to sit on the Supreme Court, who pass from the earth. It was believed that the judgments handed down by the heavenly court during the days of awe included those that determined who would live or die. The prayer spoken on Rosh Hashanah speaks of the court's verdict on how many will pass from the earth and how many will be created, who will live and who will die at his predestined time, and who before his time. And so as the sacred calendar turned to the days on which it was believed that the heavenly court passed its verdicts as to who would pass from the earth, a verdict was passed. And one then passed from the earth, one who had sat on the nation's highest of courts, Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg, passed from the earth. Sunset. In the year when the themes of each of the ancient holy days manifested in concrete physical realities and events, so too did it manifest on the Feast of Trumpets. The turning to the court, the highest of courts, the judge, the passing of the verdict, and the passing from earth, it all happened at the time appointed by the sacred calendar. In 2020, the Feast of Trumpets started at sunset on Friday, September 18th. When did Judge Ginsburg pass from the earth? On Friday, September 18th, the Feast of Trumpets. That Friday night, as the liturgy of the Jewish world spoke of the judgment of the Most High Court concerning who would pass from the earth, the nation's most high court released the news to the world that one of its justices had passed from the earth. As with all Hebrew holy days, the Feast of Trumpets began at sunset, Friday evening. On September 18th, 2020, in Washington, D.C., the sun set at 7:11 p.m. The Supreme Court announcement of Justice Ginsburg passing went forth just after the sunset. Judges and judgment. That Judge Ginsburg passed from the earth on the day that speaks of being summoned to appear before the heavenly court could be seen as a sign that all must stand before God, and that even the highest of judges will be judged in the court of the Most High, and all the judgments and verdicts of man will be judged by the judgment and verdict of God. This brings us to the other side of the mystery. All the correlations and manifestations of the ancient holy days led up to this one, and they all took place in the Jubilean year of abortion. The Jubilee brings inversion. The generation that brought death now saw death come upon it, and now, on Yom Hadin, the day of judgment, death came to one of them who sat as judge in the Supreme Court. It was the Supreme Court that played the most central and critical role in the sanctioning and establishing of abortion throughout the nation. In this, it was usurping the role of the heavenly court, passing verdict as to who will live and who will die. Its ruling passed judgment on millions of the most innocent, causing them to die before their time. The overturning. The Jubilee is the time of the return. So now it would all return to the Supreme Court. Here on Yom Hadin, the Supreme Court was the defendant. America was the defendant, and both were guilty. Here on the day of judgment, the heavenly court would begin passing judgment on the judgment of man, the judgment of the Supreme Court, and would overturn it. And it would all begin at nightfall of Yom Hadin, the time that sets in motion the return and repentance. The very death of Judge Ginsburg at that time would set in motion a return and a repentance, and would begin the overturning. Remove the evil of the decree. That same night, Jewish people gathered together in synagogue throughout the nation to pray and seek mercy from judgment. They recited in unison the last line of the appointed Netana Tokef prayer. It was this: but repentance, prayer, and righteousness remove the evil of the decree. The evil of the decree can be taken as an ordained calamity or misfortune. But in the case of America, the words could be taken another way. An evil decree had gone forth from the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade, and it had led to the death of multiplied millions of children. But that night, as they chanted the words, "Remove the evil of the decree," a Supreme Court justice was removed, the very event that would make possible the removal of the evil decree. The case of Dobbs v. Jackson had been submitted to the Supreme Court just 3 months before Judge Ginsburg's passing, and it was submitted on Sivan 23, the day of the revoking of the evil decree. Now in the court to which it was submitted, and on the day when the words "remove the evil of the decree" are pronounced, the judge's passing made possible that the evil decree could actually be removed. The autumn window. Had the Supreme Court justice not passed from the earth at that exact time, every other return and reversal of the Jubilee would have come to nothing. The passing had to have taken place at the time of the ancient holy day. From the day of that passing, the American president who walked in the template of Jehu would have just 4 months left in power, and a window of just over 1 month before the election that would in effect nullify his ability to act in the matter. And just as small was the window left for the Republican-led Senate to do likewise. And it was the very summer that marked the 50th anniversary of the summer that Roe v. Wade was sent to the Supreme Court. And it was that very summer, the Jubilean summer of that sending, that Roe's Jubilean parallel, Dobbs v. Jackson, had likewise been sent to the Supreme Court. As in the Jubilean ordinance, everything was coming home. Sorry. Returning to the place of its ancestral origin, which in the case of Roe v. Wade was the Supreme Court. Had Judge Ginsburg still been on the bench when Dobbs v. Jackson was taken up by the court, the evil decree would never have been revoked. The single vote on which the revoking would rest still did not exist and could not exist before the sunset of that holy day that spoke of the heavenly court and its judgment. It was only the passing of the judge that would bring the required vote into existence to overturn the evil decree. What took place in those days was yet again beyond the realm of any human agency or plan. The hand that moved all things into their places was not of flesh and blood. Every stream of every mystery, that of the Jubilee, of Jehu in the temple, of the ancient appointed times and holy days, of Yom Hadin and the heavenly court, each one had to converge with one another at the exact time and place to pass through the window that opened up on the night of the ancient holy day. The day that had been ordained from ages past to set in motion the turning of a nation at sunset would do so again, and at sunset. The heavenly court had made its decree. And yet for all this, there was still another mystery that would have to converge with all the others, and apart from which the others would never have come to their fulfillment. What began at the sunset would open the door for the next mystery, and this one would begin in Egypt, in the river Nile. Check on you guys here. Kashul Nadu. In this revelation I just joined, so I don't what is happening. Thanks for taking time to read whatever you're reading. I hope you're doing well. Kushal, we are reading Rabbi Jonathan Kahn's book, The Josiah Manifesto. I need to have a little thing in the corner, so if you come in the middle, you know what we're reading. Just a little picture. I'll fix that for next time. And welcome. The Child of the Nile, Part 7. Chapter 32, The Boy Among the Reeds. They were casting babies into the river. It was a campaign of mass infanticide, a civilization warring against a generation of infants. Children in the Nile. The civilization was Egypt. It had enslaved the people of Israel who had settled within its borders, but Israel was multiplying. The pharaohs saw it as a threat. The pharaoh saw it as a threat and launched a war of extermination against the Hebrew babies. So he commanded his people, "Every son who is born you shall cast into the river." So the Egyptians began hunting down newborn Hebrew children. When they found a boy, they took him down to the Nile River and cast him into the waters to certain death. The Ark Baby. The biblical account then tells of a baby boy born of the Hebrews. Fearing for his life, his mother kept him hidden 3 months after his birth. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. To save her baby from death, she placed him in the ark and set him in the Nile River. The child was now floating in the same waters into which the other Hebrew babies had been cast. After he was found by the Pharaoh's daughter, his life was saved, and he was brought up as her own son. The baby was, of course, Moses. In his adulthood, he would flee the land of Egypt and then, years later, return there, sent by God on a mission to set his people free. When Pharaoh refused his demand for freedom, Moses became the vessel of Egypt's judgment, the instrument through which the 10 plagues would fall on the kingdom. Breaker of death. It is of significance that the first of the nation's plagues began in the same waters into which the Hebrew babies had been cast, the Nile. In other words, the nation's judgment had returned to the place of the nation's sin. The nature of that first plague would highlight the connection. The waters of the Nile would turn to blood, just as the blood of the Hebrew children had once reddened its waters. And the man through whom the judgment came had once floated down the same river while other Hebrew babies were being killed in its waters. It was Moses, as well, who oversaw the coming of the 10th and final plague, that of the judgment that would slay the sons of Egypt. As Egypt had sought the death of Israel's sons, now it would witness the death of its own. It was no accident that the plague began in the place where the male babies of Israel had been killed and would culminate with the slaying of the nation's sons. And it was no accident that it was one of the Hebrew babies that Egypt had sought to kill, and who had floated down the waters of death, who was now being the instrument by which the kingdom would be broken. So it was a child born in the midst of the Egyptian slaughter, who years later would be used to break the ancient powers that carried it out. Is it possible, then, that a child born of the American slaughter would be used to break the modern powers that carried it out? Chapter 33, Children of the Shadow. The critical window in America's embrace of abortion on demand began in January 1970 with its entrance into the states, and ended in January 1973 with the Supreme Court ruling that made it law of the land. The first fruits of slaughter. The unborn children of that window were the first over whose lives hung the specter of legalized murder. They were the first fruits of the generations that followed them, and over whom that shadow would also loom. Over 1 million of that generation who were alive in their mothers' wombs during that window of time would not be alive at its end. In the case of ancient Egypt, it was one of the Hebrew babies that had survived the days of slaughter who years later would break the power that had spilled the children's blood. What about the American slaughter of its children? Could there have been a child born in that critical 3-year window of abortion's entrance into America up until the ruling of Roe v. Wade, a child born in the days of that first slaughter, whose life would be spared and who, years later, would be central in the breaking of the power behind the slaughter? There was. The girl among the reeds. The child was a baby girl conceived in the midst of the 3-year window. She was born in New Orleans on January 28, 1972. Her parents gave her the name Amy. Years later, she would become famous as Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Roe v. Wade would be overturned by a single vote. She would be the one to cast it. Without her coming onto the court at that exact time, and without the casting of her vote as she did in the case of Dobbs v. Jackson, Roe v. Wade would never have been overturned. Her life was the missing piece of the puzzle. In the shadow of Roe. So the person who would break Roe v. Wade and begin the turning back of abortion was the child born in its shadow. She would in fact be the first justice to sit on the Supreme Court, born in the days when it was legal to prevent her from being born. It was the overworking of the mystery that went back over 3,000 years to the baby in the Nile, the outworking. It was not only that she came into the world in that critical window of the emerging slaughter, but that it was at the equally pivotal time when Roe v. Wade was moving through the American judicial system on its way to become the law of the land. In fact, she was likely conceived in the same month the case that would overturn Roe v. Wade would also arrive at the same court. The case would be given 2 Supreme Court hearings. Barrett was born in between those 2 hearings, and so in accordance with the mystery, The one whose birth was framed by Roe v. Wade would arrive at the Supreme Court just when the case that would overturn Roe v. Wade would also arrive at the court. Princess of Egypt. Everything had to be in its exact place. Had Judge Ginsburg not died on the Feast of Trumpets, Amy Coney Barrett might never have come to sit as justice on the Supreme Court, and certainly not at the time when the pivotal case concerning abortion had come before it. But so too it was in the case of Moses. The princess of Egypt just happened to have come to the Nile as baby floated down its waters. Without the Exodus would never have happened as it did. So with Amy Barrett. Everything had to happen just as it did for Roe v. Wade to be overturned. Judge Ginsburg was of the generation that had legalized the killing of the unborn. Judge Barrett was of the generation whose killing in the womb had been legalized by Judge Ginsburg's generation. Now the one would be taken away, and the other would come into her place. And for the first time, a child born in the days of abortion on demand would sit on the Supreme Court and rule for the children who had not yet been killed. And it all came to pass in the year of the abortion jubilee, when all is reversed, inverted, and undone. The overturning of Roe v. Wade would involve the jubilee not only of America's sin, but of the one who would overturn it. This is the last one, guys. Chapter 34, Child of the Nile. Moses came into his calling as the deliverer of his people in the days of plague. Judgment had come upon the land. Amy Barrett came into her calling likewise during the days of plague. Her nomination, her confirmation, and her swearing in all took place in the days of masks, social distancing, and death, the plague's first year on the land. Year of arrival. The child who was born when abortion was advancing through the legal and judicial halls of America would be raised to the Supreme Court, just as the case of Dobbs v. Jackson was sent to the court in June. She was nominated in late September. Dobbs v. Jackson had just been sent to the court that summer. As she had been born when Roe v. Wade was pending before the court, so she would come to the court just when Dobbs v. Jackson was pending before it. The Jubilee of Amy Coney Barrett. But the mystery would involve more than the Jubilee of abortion. What happens if one takes the Jubilean countdown of Leviticus 25 and applies it to the life of Amy Barrett? 7 times 7 years from the day of her birth brings us to January 28, 2021. That day marks the completion of her 49th year and the beginning of her 50th and Jubilean year. Amy Barrett was sworn into office as a Supreme Court Justice at the end of October 2020. 3 months after being sworn into the court, her Jubilean year began. And so the great majority of her first year on the court was her year of Jubilee. And it was then, in her Jubilean year, that the Supreme Court took up the case of Dobbs v. Jackson in May 2021. When the case received its heartening in December of 2021, it was heard before Barrett in her Jubilean year. And when Amy Barrett first cast the deciding vote that would overturn Roe v. Wade, it was the year of her Jubilee in which she cast it. Moses in the courts of Pharaoh. The Jubilee of Amy Barrett and that of Roe v. Wade would converge for 6 days. The Jubilee of Roe v. Wade would then continue, and in the midst of it, Roe v. Wade would be overturned. And when Roe v. Wade was overturned, Barrett, who had cast the deciding vote, was 50 years old. As the Hebrew boy taken from the Nile into Pharaoh's palace was appointed to one day return there and fulfill his appointed part at the appointed time to set his people free, so the girl born in the days when Roe v. Wade made its way through the halls of the American court was appointed to one day enter those same halls to fulfill her appointed part at her appointed moment. For Amy Coney Barrett was America's Child of the Nile. In the next section, the mysteries we have seen thus far will now converge into the span of a single day. All right. What a good read. Two friends chatting. More proof that there are no accidents or coincidences in God's kingdom. Isn't that the truth? It's funny to me that people, I guess it's ignorance, can't see it. It's heartbreaking to me actually that they can't see it because um, I think in seeing it, so many things come together, and in this world that so many people lament, makes no sense, begins to make sense, doesn't it? All of these things that are happening are spiritually appointed. And we talk about this a lot. I mention a lot that, um, be gentle with your fellow man and be forgiving, because we do not fight against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, against spiritual forces. And you can really see this. You can see that. Um, we talked about this a little bit last week about how sorry, I know that probably should move that over a little bit. We talked a little last week about how um, no thing goes unrepaid, right? So if you do something wrong, somehow you pay for that. You may not realize it, um, but whether it's through this quiet guilt, or you push it away, you don't want to think about it because you have guilt about that thing. Whether it's a direct consequence, um, whether it's a consequence that changes the way that you feel about yourself, there's a consequence always. When you do something good, there's a consequence, even if nobody sees it. Um, I try to, every once in a while, I try to do a little kindness to Don and not tell him what it was, just so that, it says that if you're going to do a kindness, don't let the left hand know what the right hand's doing. And I like to do that. Do little kindnesses for people and not mention it, not expect any um, repayment for it here, not expect any attaboys, to do it just for the glory of God. Um, and then sometimes I do things that do get noticed, and that glorifies God as well. Last night I hadn't put a note in Don's lunchbox as well in a long time. And I thought, I'm going to put a note in his lunchbox. And so I just put in there, Happy Hump Day, love Penny. Um, and, he left me a note back. I'm trying to remember what it said. I don't know. I love you, sweetheart. Something like that. Um, but, just these little kindnesses that we do. Um, and I feel like we probably need to do more of them because there's so many little wrongs that we do that go unnoticed, or, um, that we don't realize that we're suffering a consequence for those, that we kind of need to tip the scale the other way. So in your life, we talked last week about having an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control. An internal locus of control says I primarily control my life through the decisions that I make, and when things out of my control happen to me, I can still be in control by going to God, asking for his guidance, and being my best self in those situations, trying to learn a spiritual truth from those sorts of things. I can't remember where I was going with that. Oh, the locus of control. And an external locus of control has you as the victim. You're the victim of everything. You have no control over anything. Everything happens to you. And that's just not true. It's just not. Um, even if it's something as small as, say you get into an argument with a store clerk, um, well, had you not, I guess left when you left, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to run into that store clerk and get into an argument with her. Um, so there are all these other things at play that happened. Um, but still, you can have an internal locus of control about that. You can get with a dodgy clerk, who's being hateful, and you can choose to show her kindness. A kind word turns away wrath, or soft word turns away wrath, rather than get into an argument with her. So there again, it's your choice. It's not something that happened to you. It's something that you made a choice about. And they're hard choices. I don't disagree. Sometimes um, I'm not one to fight. I'm not one to like start a dispute. Don is more that kind of person. He'll get stressed out at work or whatever, and then he'll start a fight with me to kind of relieve that stress. And I'm not one to really do that or to start a fight. Like, I think he would even admit this, if we're having a row about something, he probably started it, because I just hate to fight. I hate conflict. Um, and as far as it goes with him, I always try to ask myself, if I walked out the door, and something happened to him, would this fight have been worth having? And generally the answer is no. But sometimes, he's being ridiculous and I have to dig my heels in and push back. Otherwise, I think it can be the nature of other people to kind of walk on you if you don't push back. And so, yeah, I think absolutely you can stand up for yourself. Um, and that is still having an internal locus of control. Yes, maybe he's started a disagreement because he's stressed, but how can I rise above that? How can I shift the situation? How can I set the tone in my household? And women, do not underestimate your ability to do this. The woman sets the tone in the house, whether she realizes it or not. And so I'm trying to make this effort to be put together when my husband comes home, and not have my hair standing on end and still be in pajamas, to at least have, a little lip gloss on, my face washed, and my hair up. Um, because that sets a tone. You know, I welcome him when he comes home. When he walks in the door, I say, "There he is," or "There's my guy," and I smile at him, and it sets a tone. He comes in and he's like, "Oh, she's happy to see me," and it helps avert some of that stress from his day that he might feel he needs to. And I don't think he does it intentionally. I think he's just stressed, and then something here irritating will happen and he'll start in. But I can do a lot. I have an internal locus of control, so I can do a lot to change that. Part of what I do is I know that he has a very physically stressful job that causes him to be in physical pain when he comes home. And so I try to do things physically to soothe him. I try to make sure his dinner is ready. Um, and I'm a traditional wife in that way. I think that's his going to work and earning money helps us take care of ourselves. And my contribution to that, which is just as important, is making sure that he's fed when he comes home. I don't want him to have to wander around looking for something to eat. I mean, I have it ready on the plate, um, and I bring it to him because I know his feet hurt, and I want to bless him that way. And so, what little trouble is it to me if I'm walking my food in there anyway, to stop and hand him his plate and pour his milk and everything? And it's just a way that I bless him, and he blesses me in a million ways just the same. I was teasing him this weekend about, how long have we been together? 13 years, and you still don't know how to make my coffee. So I'm committed to training him in that way, so that on the weekends, he usually gets up before I do on the weekends. And and I'm trying to get him to think about having that coffee ready. I'll get him there yet. I'll let you guys know when I wake up to coffee, because that's going to be quite a day. And I will reward him accordingly with hugs and kisses and thank yous and, "Oh my goodness, you made my coffee." But anyway, it was an interesting read today. Interesting, the way um, the whole jubilee of abortion is coming forward, how Amy Coney Barrett ties in, how Ruth Bader Ginsburg ties in. And it's funny because I had been praying, and I don't say this, in fact, I don't often tell it because I feel a little bad about it. But I had been praying for um, the Lord to take Ruth Bader Ginsburg peacefully. I'm like, she's older, she's sick, she's obviously near her end time. Um, Lord, take her peacefully, um, so that she can be replaced with another conservative judge. And that feels kind of wrong. Like I wasn't so much praying for her death, but praying that if it was soon to come, could it come when we could appoint another Supreme Court judge? And I was very conflicted about praying for that. Like I said, I wasn't praying for her to die, but for her, if her time were to come, for it to be peaceful. Um, and then when it happened, I was like, "Oh no, did I do that?" I'm sure I didn't, but I was worried about it. But I thought, I don't know that that is an unchristian way to pray. If you know somebody is, and she was, I mean, she was at death's door. She was circling the drain, as we say in the healthcare profession. And I was just praying that it would be peaceful and that the timing would line up so that we could put a conservative judge in there. And it did happen. Um, so when you think about all the things that have to come into play for one thing to happen, it's kind of crazy. I don't think you can write that all off to coincidence. Um, I I just don't think you can. And so it's interesting to see Jonathan pull all of that together. It's very um, interesting to see how all of the timing worked out. And I was born in 1970. Did they say Amy was born in 73? I can't. Yeah, she's 3 years younger than me, so she was born in 73. So interesting that she was born right on when that ruling came. And whether you now, as far as Jonathan Cahn's background, he was an atheist, um, and now he is a Messianic Jew. And so, that's even kind of interesting that he's here to tell us the story and that I'm even here to tell it to you. So I just love how all of those sorts of things work out. But it'll be interesting to read forward to see what else he's got there. Last week we talked about how Trump came into office and how his rise and his rule very much is in line with Jehu, and Jehu was a boat rocker. Jehu was going to stop the sacrifice of children to Baal and Moloch, and very much came in as a contentious leader. And I think you could say the same of President Trump. He's got good and bad for sure, as we all do. But I got to say, Roe v. Wade going back to the states was quite a thing. And I do think that we need to get away from this just mass genocide. It's so funny. I hear so many groups in the United States talking about genocide. Genocide of the Palestinians, genocide of the Jews, genocide of trans, of LGBTQ, of which that's not even the case. We've so bastardized that word to where it doesn't mean anything anymore. There is no, the trans people consider, even if you don't agree with them, that that's killing them, that's violence toward them, and so that's a type of genocide when it's not. And I so see that word misused and abused to the, like, racism, to the point where it just doesn't mean anything anymore. Two Friends Chatting says, remind me, Nurse Penny, to stay on your good side. Wow, I see what you did to RPJ. She was old. Alexa, how old was Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Alexa, how old was Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg died on September 18, 2020 at the age of 87.
She was 87. Alexa, what's life expectancy for a woman in the United States?
The average lifespan of a woman in the United States is 81 years.
She'd exceeded her life expectancy by 6 years. Don't judge me. I still am torn about it. It's funny because I have like these different weird things that I've been praying for a really long time. Like I've been praying for Ozzy Osbourne to come to know the Lord. I have been praying for this probably since I was 16 years old. I don't know why. I'm not a fan of his. I don't dislike him. I just was compelled to pray for him as a teenager, and I've been praying for him ever since. Pleistocene epic. What the heck does that mean? Eric T. Reed. Hold on, I got to look that up. Pleistocene epic. Oh, there it is. Pleistocene epic. You guys are so flippin' smart. I never even heard of this. Often referred to colloquially as the Ice Age. Oh, okay. Is the geological epoch that lasted from 2.58 million to 11,700 years ago, spanning the Earth's most recent period of repeated glaciations. Before a change was finally confirmed in 2009 by the International Union of Geological Sciences, the cutoff of the Pleistocene and the preceding Pliocene was regarded as 1.8 million years before present time. Publications from earlier years may use the definition of the period. Interesting. So Ice Age. I don't know why you popped that in there. That seems random. Sounds old, but we're still in it. Oh, okay. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, it does sound old, doesn't it? Um, but anyway, just very interesting read. I'll be interested. Let me see how many chapters we've got. For people who it will drive crazy, because it would drive me crazy, that little beeping that you were hearing every time I picked up my coffee or my chicory, is this. It's a little heated thing that you can set your coffee on so that your last sip of coffee is as hot as your first. And it actually works pretty well. I really like that. Hold on. Now I forgot why I was picking up the book. Oh, to see how many chapters there are. Boy, that's hot. Okay. There are. This one's a little longer than the last one, I think. Okay, this is 273. And where did we leave off, guys? We left off on part 7, the day of turning. Let's see if there's. Oh, that page number won't match. Part 7. That's part 8. Hold on. We'll figure out here how many we've got left. Okay, that's where we're at. Part 7, the day of turning. That says Children of the Nile. Where are the parts? Oh, it's 8. Okay, hold on. I'm only going to pray us out. So if you're waiting for something far more interesting, it's not going to happen. Hang on. Okay, part 8, the day of turning. So we're on page 133, and there are a total of 274 pages. So we've probably got two or three more before we finish it. This is a longer one for sure. But I'm enjoying it. I'm interested to see where he's going to go with it. Eric says, what it really is before dirt hardens to rock. Just guess the year. They just guess the years. Yeah, that's true for sure. But anyway, good read today. I'll be interested. I thought it was a little bit more last week, but still good. So if you missed last week, go back and listen. There's 2 before this one, so you can get all caught up on where we are. But this is still a good one that you can kind of listen in the middle and get something out of it. Friday night, we will have our show. For those of you that, if you're on YouTube, I'm not doing the Friday night show on YouTube because I keep getting copyright issues with the music that I'm using, which it's not a copyright strike. It's just YouTube has made it so that people that wrote those little short bits of music for sites like Canva that we all use in our videos, they can now monetize those. So they can partially monetize my videos. And I don't monetize my videos. So that kind of bothers me. I'm waiting on Don to make me some new music. He's working on it. But anyway, last week's episode definitely, last Friday night's episode definitely was more than a PG rating. So I took it down off Facebook. So if you want to watch that one, come over on. It wasn't anything wicked. It was just topics that weren't appropriate for little kids. We talked about traditional marriage. We talked about marital type things. So if that gives you an idea of why I took it down and why I didn't put it up on YouTube, that's why. So if you're on YouTube, you can watch Friday Night Show on Rumble. Just go to rumble.com and look for Nurse Penny, and they're subscribed to my channel, and you're good to go. There's a bunch of other really good channels if you're new to Rumble. If you're on Rumble and you want to donate, I'm going to actually show you how to do that because people were having trouble with this in another chat that I was in. I was watching let's come down here to mine. Let me pause this. Okay. Let me do a screen share here. All right. Where's my chat? There it is. Okay. Anyway, there was a gal in, I think it was Red Pills. I can't remember whose chat it was. And God love her, she could not figure out how to chat. And so I did a quick little video, but you couldn't really see much. Okay. So let's go to the screen share. Hold on. Let me stop that. This one. Okay. So make sure you can see. Of course, I paused it in a terrible place. Let's make this a little bit bigger. And let's see if we can get this chat popped out. All right, let's try sharing that screen. Sorry, guys. Share screen. Share screen. There we go. And there's the chat. Okay. Okay, so in this chat, you see Eric's comments, you see two friends chatting. You come down here and you see, let me see if you can see that. How do you, this is frustrating. I think I have to move the screen up. Okay, let's move this over in the middle and see if you can see it better. No, of course not. That's so frustrating. Okay, anyway. Maybe if we crop it. There we go. Okay. Okay, see down here on the screen. Oh, for the love of all that is good and holy. Okay, see down here on the screen where there's my picture down here by where you type in the message. Right below that, there is a dollar sign. See if you can see that. You can see that. See, it says dollar sign and subscribe. If you hit subscribe, you'll be subscribed at $5 a month, which is very helpful because if everybody does that, that really adds up. So if you hit subscribe, that's what happens. And it'll come up and it'll ask you. So watch, I'll send myself a donation. So I hit that dollar sign, right? Your rant here. Here is how to donate in the live chat. Okay. And then say I want to give myself $5 because I feel like I did a really good job. So I'm going to do that. Then see down here where it says, please select payment card. Let me see if you can see that. You can. Okay, where it says, please select payment card. You have to go in and you have to link your card, right? So here where it says add a new card, and this is safe. It's a locked, you can see up here in the, where it says rumble.com, there's a lock and that shows you that that's safe. So there's my card, right? So I would click on my card, but you would have to add a card if you haven't added one, right? So I click on my card and then I hit buy and send. Do you want to confirm the donation of $5? Yes. And that's how people are doing that. If you didn't know, that's how people are doing that. And then it appears up here, and it stays up there so that I can see it. Eventually, you won't see it as the comments come up, but that's how you chat. And if you don't want to chat, you can just hit subscribe and you'll automatically be billed $5 a month, which really helps because I've got like 2,000 followers. If everybody did that, that would be huge. And you wouldn't even notice the money gone out of your account. So there's that. Also in the description section is my PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, and you could donate that way, which I really, really appreciate. And it helps cover the costs of the show. Okay, let me go back here. There we go. All right, let me see if I missed any comments. Coffin says, Penny, you're too funny. I hope Ozzy comes to know the Lord too. I really do. I feel like their family is coming around. Didn't Kelly just have a baby? I don't know the son's name. I've just been praying on it for a long time. And there's somebody like, who is it? Like Alice Cooper or something that became a Christian? And Don had been praying for Alice Cooper. Yeah. So here on Movie Guide, you've got the real Alice Cooper shares his testimony. It's crazy. So if you didn't know that, yeah, Alice Cooper's now a Christian. So if Alice Cooper can do it, Ozzy Osbourne, let's see if he's done it. Maybe he hasn't. I don't know. Would that be something? Ozzy Osbourne, Christian. Let's see. What are Ozzy Osbourne's religious beliefs? I'm a Christian. I was christened as a Christian. I used to go to Sunday school. What? Faith Christian. It says he's a Christian. Well, all right, I did it. He's a member of the Church of England, prays before every performance, but does not read the Bible. So, he's got a little work to do. Okay, hold on. You guys, look, I did it. Hold on, I'm going to show you this. Let's do the screen share. Who knew? Okay, make sure you can see that. I don't know why the dimensions are all off. Okay, let's cut this off over here. Okay, let me see if that works. Okay. Hopefully we go up this page and you'll be able to see it now. I don't know what's going on with the... Let me make sure you can see that. Hi. My mother-in-law used to do that. Hi. There we go. Okay. Ozzy Osbourne isn't the first associated with heavy metal and bringing satanic imagery and the occult into the world of mainstream music. Though his songs use dark imagery, is Osbourne religious? Ozzy Osbourne is a Christian and a member of the Church of England. He prays before every performance, but doesn't read the Bible, as he claims the Bible is written in language he doesn't understand. We need to send him a New Living Translation. Ozzy was one of the co-founders of the band Black Sabbath. It rose to popularity. Blah, 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 blah. The band's use of heavy metal and strong use of low riffs producing frightening music, but they never endorse Satanism. So get your Bibles and let's find out more about Ozzy Osbourne being a man of God. That yes, they use satanic imagery. I just wanted to read more about Ozzy Osbourne, really. On the contrary, Ozzy and Bill Ward never participated in such practices. Ozzy said, I do have my beliefs, and my beliefs are certainly not satanic. We were very interested in the satanic side of stuff, certainly Geezer and myself. We were interested in the occult just out of curiosity. We wondered what would happen if we did certain things, just like we wondered about life after death. We got into all sorts of stuff. Maybe it was the drugs in those days. I don't know. And we're still using that imagery with heaven and hell. On the contrary, Ozzy and Bill Ward never participated in such practices. Ozzy Osbourne is a member of the Church of England, although he does not frequently attend. He says, if I have gone to church, I'd still be there now, confessing all my sins. When every other contemporary band was rising to fame with unique style, Black Sabbath took stage with an unprecedented genre in music horror. Osbourne believed if people pay to watch horror movies, why not include horror in a music show? Ozzy recently appeared for an interview with GQ. On being asked, are you a religious man? He answered, I've tried reading the Bible, but it's in a language that I don't understand. Someone should do a version in my language. He says he's not always been religious, but officially joined the Church of England in 92 and began praying before each performance. He's engaged in many behaviors most religions would frown upon. Granted, most of those were before his sobriety. His wife Sharon asked him to throw a pair of doves in the air, and the Black Sabbath frontman ended up throwing one and biting the head off the other, and it freaked everybody out. Yes, it did. He's thrown raw pieces of meat on the audience, bit a bat's head off because he thought it was hilarious. Ozzy Osbourne does pray before every show, has done that since becoming a member of the Church of England in 92. Ozzy says he hasn't spoken publicly about his faith since 1992, but Christianity continues to be a subtle part of who he is. Okay, so that's kind of interesting because if you're really a Christian, I don't know that it can be a subtle part of who you are. I mean, yes, you can be kind of I believe in God. But Christian implies a walk, a daily walk of faith. So I think he believes in God is what he's saying, and that he prays. But interesting, who knew? I didn't know. I feel like I had a part in that. Next guy to try is Marilyn Manson. Good luck with that one. I will definitely start praying for Marilyn Manson. Eric Reed says, there's Church of England joke about why won't Anglicans be beheaded after the rapture? Professional courtesy. Oh my gosh. Okay, wait, let's see. Maybe Marilyn Manson has changed his ways. Marilyn Let's see. Marilyn Manson responds to rumors he's a Christian. This one's not too long. Let's look at that. Okay. Stop the screen share. Start. Oh, wait, let's pull that up first. It's going to get me in trouble with YouTube, I'm sure. Marilyn Manson. Where is it at? Share. Okay.
And raised eyebrows when he participated in a prayer circle and a religious ceremony with Kanye West and Justin Bieber. This is not to shame Marilyn Manson for any religious beliefs that he has or doesn't have, but it is certainly ironic given the fact that he is known as the Antichrist superstar. He has spent decades burning Bibles on stage. So hopefully you can see why this is noteworthy. If Marilyn Manson is now Christian, this would of course dramatically change his imagery on stage. It's hard to imagine he would become a Christian and subsequently continue burning Bibles on stage. Does this mean that Marilyn Manson and Joel Osteen will soon be hosting services? Because that's exactly what his friend Kanye West has done. This entire thing has garnered so much attention that People magazine actually reached out to Marilyn Manson's publicist, and they actually responded about whether or not he has converted to Christianity. And this is very interesting because the publicist does not deny that Marilyn Manson might have converted to Christianity. The spokesperson for Marilyn Manson pointed out that Manson was, quote, an integral part of the Sunday service. For those of you who are unaware of what the Sunday service is, Kanye West himself is a devout Christian. This is, in fact, a Christian service that he has been putting on now for years. And again, Kanye West has previously brought him out at his Donda listening party back in August, but that wasn't as much of a religious event. Sunday service absolutely is. Manson's publicist said, quote, throughout his career, Marilyn Manson has collaborated with innovative and legendary artists across all musical genres, and Ye is no exception. When asked about whether Manson has converted to Christianity, again, the spokesperson said, quote, that's nobody's business. Again, Christian groups have protested Manson shows for years. Going back to the 90s, he was heavily criticized by seeing himself from Manson. One of Manson's accusers by the name of Ashley Smithline is publicly suing Marilyn Manson. She lashed out at Justin Bieber and Kanye West for aligning themselves with Manson.
Okay, so apparently I don't want to play that whole thing and get in trouble with YouTube. Stop screen share. Well, there we go. Maybe. I don't know. You're burning Bibles on stage. I think it's probably your Christianity is probably being called into question. Eric says, Alice Cooper was always a Christian. I could hear it even when I wasn't. Oh, wow. Radar Man says, sounds like the Great Awakening is upon us. It does, doesn't it? I mean, when you got Alice Cooper and Ozzy Osbourne professing to be believers, there you go. Ruth Bader Ginsburg going to be with the Lord just in time for Amy Coney Barrett to come in and make the ruling on the abortion. Or Roe v. Wade. It's so funny. There's a lot of people that are like, they made abortion illegal. No, they didn't make abortion illegal. They sent abortion back to the states so the states could sort it out for themselves because there's no provision in the Constitution for the Supreme Court to act there. So it becomes a state issue. And for all the, like I said, all the people that are upset about Republicans and abortion, let me remind you, you always knew where Republicans or where conservatives, I don't consider myself a Republican, where conservatives stood on abortion. And you thought you always knew where Democrats stood on it until they did not codify it into law, even when they saw the leaked ruling. They didn't move to codify it into law. So the Democrats don't care if you have a right to abortion either. They just want to have it as a cudgel during elections. Because if they really cared about that, they would have solved it years ago. They would have definitely moved to codify it into law when they saw the leaked ruling from the Supreme Court. So you have only Democrats to blame for that. And you might want to start questioning whether they really espouse any of the views you say you espouse, because my guess is it's only for convenience. And that's true politically for both sides, for sure. I don't know that most of the uniparty up there really gives one shake about your rights, your freedoms, so long as they can keep their power and their money. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation, and I try not to be political on Wednesday mornings. So let me pray us out. I will see you guys Friday night. We will not be on YouTube Friday night. We will only be on Rumble. I've not looked at what we're going to talk about yet. That will determine whether we're going to be on Facebook or not. But if you don't find me on Facebook or YouTube on a Friday night, come to Rumble and look, because that's probably where I am. Generally, if I'm not going to be on, I put a notice out that I'm not going to be on. But anyway, let me pray us out. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for this day and for all of our friends that were able to come on and hang out on the show and chat. I pray blessings over everybody that's been here during the live stream and everybody that would watch during replay. Father, I ask for most of all your protection for everything that's going on. We're very worried about sleeper cells being in the country and those being activated related to what's going on between Israel and Palestine. Father, I pray for resolution in that situation that would come without bringing the deaths of anyone else, and that would bring the safety of both parties, and that there would be a renewal in the relationship to work together, that Hamas would be taken out of that situation so that the people of Palestine can choose their own future and choose a leader that would hopefully keep them out of harm's way. Father, I pray that for the people making the decisions in Israel, I would pray that that your Holy Spirit would weigh heavy on their hearts with every decision that they make, so that they are doing so in such a ways to protect innocent life, protect the lives of people who don't have anything to do with what the decisions that Hamas is making. Father, it's a difficult situation, and I pray that you would put compassion on our hearts when we're dealing with each other, so that these don't become screaming matches here in our own country, and that we're able to unite on what is best for America and for Americans. And then definitely that we would all take a role in prayer, in praying for everything that's going on between Israel and Palestine and Iran and Syria and Jordan, everyone else that's involved. Father, I thank you so much, and I'm so honored and humbled that you would give me this platform and allow me to speak to your people. And I pray that I do that with love and encouragement in ways that helps them to be more and helps draw them closer to you, and all the glory for that goes to you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, guys, I love you whole big bunches. I will see you Friday night. Remember, we're starting early at 7:30. If you don't see us on YouTube or Facebook, come on over to rumble.com, and just search for Nurse Penny, and you'll be able to find the podcast. Make sure that you follow and like. If you were here, please hit like. That does help us in the algorithm. Rumble doesn't really know we exist, so if you hit the like, that really helps. Eric says, thank you, Nurse Penny, for the reminder earlier about the timings with Judge Amy. You're welcome, Eric. And thank you to Rabbi Khan for bringing that out for us, so that's something that we can think about, because that's really something that makes it a bigger thing, doesn't it? I think we get into the habit of thinking so much of what happens is manipulated by our government, and we forget that the hand of God can be in things. And that makes me feel a little bit better that, yes, this is all chaos and things are scary and there's a lot of tumult going on right now, but the hand of God is still in this. And that's something that we need to remember, and we need to be praying about. All is not lost. Turn to God. We need to be the people that stand in the gap for those that are not turning to God, because it's sure looking like the end times are upon us, isn't it? And I'm ready, I mean, I've died. I'm ready to go back. But I would like to see my grandchildren grow up and have children. And so I'm kind of torn there. But heaven's pretty great, and I wouldn't mind hanging out there with you guys. Anyway, I will talk to you guys on Friday night. I love you whole big bunches. Nurse Penny out.